When God calls, lessons from the book of Esther. Had a guy ask me just a couple weeks ago, how in the world do you find anything in Esther to preach about? God's not even mentioned in there. That's the fun of it. Because God's not always where we can see him, but he is always active in our lives. You know, there's a great theologian. I've read him for many, many years. Even as a child, I read this great theologian. This theologian's name is Charlie Brown. Here we go. Here's how we're starting. Lucy asked Charlie Brown as they were walking together, "Why do you think we're put on earth, Charlie Brown?" Charlie Brown gave her a simplistic answer: to make others happy. Well, Lucy stopped and reflected. I don't think I'm making anyone very happy. But of course, nobody's making me very happy either. Somebody's not doing his job. At home, she sought the opinion of her brother Linus, who was busy sucking his thumb and holding his blankie. Charlie Brown says that we are put here on earth to make others happy. And surprised Linus said, "Is that why we're here? Well, I guess I better start doing a better job. I'd hate to be shipped back." Going nowhere, the exasperated Lucy went back to Charlie Brown to check to see if things had changed. She said, "I'm intrigued by this view you have on the purpose of life, Charlie Brown. You say we're put here on earth to make others happy." Charlie Brown affirmed that and said, "That's right." The disgruntled Lucy finally raised the question that still bothered her. Well, what are others put here for? Oh boy. There's a sermon right there. But we'll pass on that because I want to jump into Esther, because Esther had to deal with this issue very young in life. What on earth am I here for? And it's the same question you and I need to deal with today. What on earth am I here for? You see, so far Esther didn't have to do too much. She couldn't complain about her storied life that she had. Previously, her parents passed away. Her older cousin Mordecai took care of her, supplied all that she needed, and kept her from trouble. And now she's living in a royal castle as the first lady of the country. She's got maids. She's got servants. Anytime she wants them, they're right at her disposal. But the first big test of her success came to her when she heard of the Jews' overnight crisis and her family's current plight. You see, up to now, Xerxes took center stage in chapter 1. Mordecai took star of the stage in chapter 2. And Haman was a star in chapter 3. Chapter 4 is where we see Esther is now going to be the star. Esther's going to steal the show. So how did she shine? Her finest hour was not winning the crown. It was not ascending to the throne, not living as royalty, enjoying the finer things and making herself youthful, beautiful, or presentable. But her life, because she has decided this early in life, her life to count, she wanted her life to count and her presence to be felt. What kind of person, what kind of character does it take to be a disciple of Jesus? What mental, spiritual, emotional preparation is needed to meet the challenges that we face out there, so that when we meet those challenges, we meet them like Jesus would? That's what Esther does. I just got 3 little points today that I think Esther's going to teach us how we can be the disciples Jesus wants to be. Number 1, remember where you're from. Remember where you're from. Esther chapter 4 is where we are today. We'll begin in verse 1. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the city wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews with fasting and weeping and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maids and servants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. Years ago, there's a very famous organist that didn't happen to be Evie. But Evie played an organ as this guy did, one that you didn't plug in because there was no electricity. It was one that you pumped to get the sound out of. So this guy is giving this recital. Again, the organ's not powered by electricity. It was pumped by hand. And so they went out and they found a young man that would come in and pump the organ. And everything's going great. And then he put his head around the side of the organ. He whispered, "We're doing a pretty good job, aren't we?" "What do you mean we?" objected the organist. A few minutes later, in the midst of a beautiful song, the organ suddenly stopped giving out any music. Desperately, the organist tried all the stops and it was no use. Then again, the little boy popped out his head and around the corner and smiled on his face. And he said, "Now do you know who I mean by we?" Esther remembered where she came from because of the people that got her there. To her credit, Esther stayed close and true to her roots. Success did not go to her head. Even though she could not go out, she managed to keep in touch with her family in a unique and subtle way. You see, her maids and servants would go out and they would find out what was going on. They would come back and tell her about the latest news on her family. This orphan queen did not forget where she was from because she kept up with what was happening at home and mostly with her family. She appreciated the sacrifice that everybody had made for her, their time, their attention, their guidance, because it gave her the opportunity to blossom and succeed. They even stayed in the background. They didn't benefit from her success. They didn't clamor to say, "Hey, we got to go see the queen," or they didn't ask her for a house or a piece of land or a position in the palace. The reward for those that were around her, their reward was seeing her happiness. I think that's a true evidence of a disciple. That I can look and see your joy and your happiness in the Lord, then that means I need to rejoice in that because of what you have done. But I got to tell you, as Esther's in the palace, the news had gone from bad to worse. But it didn't escape her attention. There was chaos, confusion, and crying all around. There was turmoil, terror, and tears everywhere. And she heard about the pain, the panic, and the persecution in the streets, especially on the home front. Chinese, in their culture, say that if you put on sackcloth, it's associated with death and dying. And that's exactly what Mordecai was thinking. The death and dying. In the New International Version, the word wailing in verse 1, not nearly as dramatic as it is in the Hebrew phrase. The Hebrew phrase is cried a cry. This is the first and the only time this phrase is used. Because you see, the normal dramatic crying in the Bible is crying with a voice. And that's mentioned numerous times, specifically with a loud voice. But Mordecai had no more voice in him. He was just all cries. Mordecai's cry was unlike any other. It was not characterized by volume and noise, but stress and distress. He didn't broadcast. He didn't bellow. You see, his sadness was there, and it was heavy. And if we use our vernacular, he cried his eyes out. You ever done that? You ever cried so hard and so much that you didn't have any more tears to cry? You prayed so hard that you lost your voice in the middle of praying. And do we realize that that is when Jesus steps in and he puts the words to God that we can't put together? He is the mediator between us and the Father. And I believe that's where Mordecai was at this stage in his life, at this time. He's just all cried out. See, the more dramatic biblical fashion of crying is crying with a loud voice. And that's several times in the Old Testament. But now with Mordecai, the crying was heightened up to crying with a loud and bitter voice. It's the only time in Scripture that bitter is connected to crying. Nobody knew why he was wailing and why he was crying outside the king's gates. No one but Esther. Esther knew what was going on. And she knew that Mordecai was out there and he wasn't looking for death, but he was looking for support. And he was looking for a solution. In verse 3, the Hebrew word for mourning occurs 24 times in the Bible, but there is no mourning throughout all Scripture. You look up the word every time. It does not compare with the mourning that was taking place in Babylon with the Jews. Was solemn mourning in Egypt when Jacob dies. But the only biblical instance of great mourning among the Jews was here in Babylon. Because now Esther is sensing that something is wrong. Something's unusual here. In Micah 1:8, the word mourning there, I love the way it's described. It's giving us a picture of the moaning of an owl. I thought that was a very interesting word picture. Moaning of an owl. You see, Esther, because of the mourning of the entire country, of the Jews in the country, she was touched, greatly touched. She was greatly affected by what she saw, what she heard concerning Mordecai and Israel's persecution and suffering in the land. She remembered where she was from. That's where it starts. The second thing that we need to learn from Esther, we need to remember who was with us. Remember who were with you. Begin in verse 4. When Esther's maids and servants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of a sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's servants assigned to attend to her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and to explain to her. And he told him to urge her to go into the king's presence and beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. There was a basketball player a few years ago. He played for, you want to guess which college he played for? Ohio State. Who said that? You're right. Played for Ohio State. His name's Michael Redd. Michael Redd was a decent college player. And when it came time for the NBA draft in the year 2000, he was the 43rd player picked. He barely made it. He was barely selected. But he was in the NBA and with the Milwaukee Bucks. In his second year in the NBA, he became the leading scorer for the Milwaukee Bucks. And after he became the leading scorer for 2 years in a row, he then signed a 6-year deal for $91 million. His dad, who was a pastor, wasn't ready for what Michael was going to do. You see, during the week, Michael's father, James, worked at the Pepsi-Cola plant. But on Sunday, he was a pastor. He's what we call a bivocational pastor. And so every Sunday, he would preach to a congregation of 25. See, he wanted to become a minister, and he founded this church. And they started out in a storefront in a strip mall, and then they moved into the basement of another church. And one day, James told the people, he said, one day we're going to trade up to something above ground. Well, Michael ambushed his father, because what he did is he bought him a church building that would seat 500 people on a prime piece of real estate right on the campus of Ohio State University. Had a steeple, stained glass windows. It was set to go. Michael said to his dad, Dad, if I ever get to the NBA, I'm going to get you and Mom a new house and a new church. His father, who was Pastor James W. Redd, said, every now and then, you just got to catch yourself drying some tears. Because Michael teased his father. He said, you weren't sure I was going to make it, were you? And Michael says, this is what I'd tell him. I'd tell him, oh, ye of little faith. The Lord gave. He gave me life. I did what I did was to give it right back to him. That's the least I could do, was to buy you a church, Dad, so you could preach to the people that are there. Buying a church. Remembering who was with you. When you make this growth and you crawl into this discipleship cocoon, you got to remember all the people that helped put you into it. So that when you come out as that butterfly, you can reach out to those people. It's about people. I grew up in a little town. Very little town. One stop sign. No stoplights. But at one time we had 4 churches and 4 gas stations. Population of the town was less than 200. We had probably 130 dogs that ran around town. No policemen. The fame of the town that I grew up in is Bowersville, Ohio, was because it was a birthplace of a man named Norman Vincent Peale. How many of you know that name? The power of positive thinking. The most negative town that you'll ever go in. But the man of positive power of thinking was there. I remember those people who set me on the road that I'm on right now. Esther is the same way. She responded in the most dramatic fashion. When she heard of Mordecai's sorrow and suffering, she was in not just distress, she was in great distress. This is the only time the word has been translated distress in the Bible. Every other time elsewhere with the Hebrew word, it's shaking or twisting or trembling or writhing. The most excruciating word to describe her suffering is a woman in labor giving birth. Guys, we don't understand. Right? 10 times that word was used for a woman's labor pains or birth pangs. Esther's agony was worse than normal childbirth. Her distress was so great, it caused that much pain. There's a couple theologians, I'm not going to mention their names because you wouldn't know who they are anyway. I don't know who they are. But they said her grief was convulsive grief. They said to be seized with painful grief. There's no hiding her respect, her concern, her affection for her cousin. Because if it wasn't for Mordecai, she was merely another orphan, another statistic, another casualty. His grief was her grief. She shared his distress, discomfort, and dismay. And what are we called to do as brothers and sisters in Christ? We are called to weep with those who weep, and we are to rejoice with those who rejoice. That's what we're talking about here. She felt that, and we need to feel that with those brothers and sisters around us. We need to feel their pain. We need to feel their joy, and we need to express it and be part of it with them. That's what it's about. Esther sent clothes to Mordecai. He rejected them. He didn't want any comfort. He didn't want any company until Esther was more involved. Until she basically clarified her position before she would do her part. Listen, Esther was never ashamed of her cousin. She was never embarrassed or upset. She never considered him a nuisance or an inconvenience, a liability, a troublemaker, a burden. She never considered him any of that. But when Mordecai is strolling around out at the king's gate, just crying his eyes out, the purpose was to prod, provoke, and pressure Esther to act. You ever do that? You want somebody to do something, so you just stand in their presence until they do it? Husbands, it doesn't work with wives. Just a heads up. All right? He wanted her to intervene. He wanted her to come out of her shell. He wanted her to investigate what was going on. And then when she asked what was going on and why, then Mordecai would be relieved of his distress. Remember where you're from. Remember who is with you. And lastly, remember why you are here. Remember why you're here. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in his inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, and that is to be put to death. The only exception to this is for when the king extend the golden scepter to him and spare his life. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you are alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from some other place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to a royal position for such a time as this. Then Esther sent his reply to Mordecai. Go gather together the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will fast as you do. And when this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. There was a Quaker historian. He was a theologian, a philosopher. His name's Rufus Jones. And then he wrote an autobiography. In that autobiography, he relates a childhood incident that really created him. I don't say created. It caused him to become the man that he became. All right? See, one day his parents told him to weed the turnip patch while they were gone. He'd just begun to weed the turnip patch, and some of his buddies came along and wanted to go fishing. Turnip patch, fishing. Not a choice to me. I'm going fishing, but the problem is, all these guys said that, we'll help you do the patch when we get back. Fishermen in here. When do you get back? After dark. Right? We're after dark. So when they got back, it was already dark. And so those boys decided they didn't need to help weed the turnip patch because they couldn't see. So they all left him alone at home. When he returned home after dark, his mother was waiting for him. Silently, she led him up to his room. He knew what he deserved, so he did not offer a word of excuse. But then he writes, a miracle happened. Mother put me in a chair. She kneeled down, she put her hands on me and told God all about me. Oh boy. She interpreted her dream of what my life was to be. She portrayed the boy and the man of her hopes. She told God what she always expected of me, and then how I had disappointed her greatly. Oh God, she prayed, take this boy of mine and make him the boy and the man he is divinely designed to be. And then she bent over, kissed him on the forehead, and went out of the room and left him alone with God. You know, sometimes I'd rather face my dad and his belt than God and his wrath. No, every time I'd rather face dad and the belt than God and his wrath. You see, up to this point, Esther was nothing more than a trophy wife. She didn't need to know too much. She didn't say or do much. As a matter of fact, up to the close of chapter 4, that's when she spoke her first words. Think about that. One verse worth of words. The book has her name. But she said very little. Actually, she said nothing in the first 3 chapters. But Mordecai was not rebuking her. Mordecai was not telling her of the wrong she had done. Mordecai was just warning her of the danger that could befall her. Esther's safety and shelter in the palace, he knew, was temporary. Because there would be enemies. They would dig into her background and find out all about her sooner or later. A lot was at stake for her, her family. Everyone around her was at risk. Now, you got to remember this. Mordecai did not ask Esther to do what she could not do. He did not manipulate her. At first, it seemed that Esther was just a puppet, but verse 17 signifies Esther coming of age right there. He applauds her courage in the face of danger. I love the Hebrew word here for instructions, because that appeared in chapter 2 when Mordecai was giving her the instructions about not letting the Jews know more than they need to know, or the beauty pageant people know more than they need to know. This is the same word. Now she is giving instructions to Mordecai. Same word. Same word. She obeyed. She didn't do anything against what she said. And now she is instructing people to pass messages to Mordecai. Now she was telling her older and wiser cousin what to do. She'd come of age. I love this because the queen, the first lady of the country, asked others to pray for her. You see, chivalry without prayer is doomed. And it's very interesting to me that Esther did not tell them to cry. There had been enough crying to begin with. Now they had better save their strength because they were not going to eat or drink for 3 days. Crying might have been good initially. But like Daddy said, get over it. Right? In our generation, as we grew up, it was not, oh, poor little thing, let's go find out what's going on. No, get over it. Time to move on. And that's what's happening here. You see, in the scripture, there is no mention at all of Esther crying. No mention of her weeping or wailing. You see, it wasn't important to record anything about her crying. It was more important for her to use her brains and to be calm during this time. You see, if you read into this just a little bit, Esther could have ended up like Vashti. She disappeared without a word. There's no dialogue about her. She purposed not to be symbolic queen. That wasn't her. That wasn't Esther. She didn't just want status. Her purpose in life was to glorify God, to be his servant, to make her life count. She was more than just a pretty face to adorn places or to adorn palaces. She had a purpose in life. You know, it's been said that 90% of caring is just showing up. That's what Esther did. Mordecai needed to know that she cared, and all she had to do was show up. But I want to tell you, for us, God did not bring you and I into this world to live a dream. He didn't call us and bring us into this world to live in luxury. He didn't call us to come into this world to live for us. He wants us to testify about Him. He wants us to care for others. He wants you and I to make a difference. Simple question. What have you done? What have you done to show somebody that you care? What have you done to make a difference? We talked a couple weeks ago. You may not know the whole world, but you may be the world to the one you do know. What have you done? What difference have you made? What have you done to testify about Him and care for others? Have I done my part? Sacrificed for somebody else? Take a stand for what we believe in? Do we have the courage of convictions, the sincerity of belief, the passion for truth, the assurance of faith, and the certainty of triumph that we can stand the test and we can stand the challenges that we're going to face when we walk out those doors this morning? My favorite line in that whole chapter is, maybe God brought you here for such a time as this. Every one of us sitting here today, God has brought us here for such a time as this. It's our time. It's our time. Esther had her time. She stood up and did what she needed to do, and we'll find out a whole lot more in the next few weeks. She stood up. She did what she needed to do. We need to stand up and do what we need to do. Because outside these walls, there's a whole lot of people that need Jesus. And we are the ones that have Him. And so we need to let them know about the love of Jesus.